Part 4.
You know that feeling when you watch a horror movie and think, thank God that's not real? Well, what if I told you some of the most disturbing films ever made are based on things that actually happened? Now, this iceberg starts uncomfortable and ends with stuff I can barely talk about on YouTube. So before we start, I need to say this is all for educational purposes. We're going to treat these topics with respect for the people involved. Alright, let's get into this. Level 1. Open Water. Open Water from 2003. This is a survival horror film shot on a tiny budget, and it's based on the disappearance of Tom and Eileen Lonergan in 1998. They were American tourists on a scuba diving trip off Australia's Great Barrier Reef. The boat left without them, just forgot they were down there. Tom was 33, Eileen was 28. They'd both graduated from Louisiana State University and had just finished a 3-year stint with the Peace Corps in Fiji and Tuvalu. They were on their way to Hawaii to start their new life together when they stopped in Queensland for what was supposed to be a routine dive trip. January 25th, 1998. The boat was the MV Outer Edge, carrying 26 passengers that day. The Lonergans were experienced divers. They each had about 80 dives under their belts. The final dive at St. Crispin's Reef started around 2:20 p.m. By 3:10 p.m, the boat left. No head count. Nobody noticed 2 people were missing. When the dive company realized their mistake 2 days later, they went back to search. Nothing. No bodies, no equipment, no trace. Tom and Eileen were never found. But here's what makes it even more haunting. About 6 months later, a fisherman found a dive slate. That's like an underwater writing board. The message read, Monday, 26 Jan, 1998, 8 a.m. To anyone who can help us. We've been abandoned on Agincourt Reef by MV Outer Edge, 25 Jan, 1998, 3 p.m. Please help to rescue us before we die. Help. They survived at least until the next morning, floating in shark-infested waters, knowing nobody was coming. Some of their gear washed up weeks later. Eileen's wetsuit had tears in it. Experts thought it was maybe from coral, maybe from something else. The exact cause of death is unknown. Dehydration, exposure, drowning, sharks, nobody knows. The film is shot with real sharks, which makes it even more unsettling. And unlike most survival stories, there's no Hollywood ending here. You watch these 2 people slowly realize they're going to die, and there's nothing they can do about it. The fact that this actually happened to real people makes it deeply disturbing. The boat captain was charged with manslaughter, but found not guilty. His company pleaded guilty to negligence, paid a fine, and went out of business. Queensland introduced stricter regulations. Mandatory independent head counts by both captain and dive masters. No similar incidents have happened since. The Conjuring. The Conjuring from 2013. This is interesting because it's based on the case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren, those paranormal investigators. The film depicts the Perron family who lived in this farmhouse in Rhode Island back in 1971 and experienced what they claimed was a haunting. The family swears this stuff happened. Andrea Perron, one of the daughters, has written books about it. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the Perron family genuinely experienced something that terrified them for years. The house is real. The Warrens' case files are real. The family's accounts are documented. The Warrens investigated hundreds of cases throughout their careers, some more credible than others. This one made enough of an impression that it became one of their most famous files. The family reported doors slamming, objects moving, apparitions, all the classic haunting stuff. It's supernatural, so it's debatable whether any of it was actually paranormal or just psychological. Nobody actually lost their lives, but it's pretty spooky if you ask me. The Fourth Kind. The Fourth Kind from 2009. This one claims to be based on real alien abduction cases from Nome, Alaska in 2000. The film uses a mix of real footage and dramatized recreations starring Mila Jovovich. Here's the thing. The movie presents itself as a documentary about Dr. Abigail Tyler, a psychologist in Nome who recorded therapy sessions where patients described being visited by a white owl. Under hypnosis, they remembered something way darker, alien abductions. The film shows actual footage of these therapy sessions alongside the dramatized versions. People screaming, convulsing, speaking in Sumerian languages they shouldn't know. It's genuinely unsettling. Now, the truth, it's complicated. The filmmakers claimed it was based on real events. Nome police came out and said there were no records of Dr. Abigail Tyler ever existing. No missing persons cases matching what the film described. The real footage was likely staged with actors. But here's what is real. Nome did have an unusually high number of disappearances between the 1960s and 2004. The FBI investigated. Most were attributed to alcohol-related deaths and accidents in harsh Alaskan conditions. The town has a dark history that the film exploited. So it's a film that presents itself as real, uses fake documentary footage to seem credible, but is based on a real town with real tragedies. The blurred line between what's real and what's fabricated makes it seriously creepy. Level 2. Zodiac. Zodiac from 2007. David Fincher's meticulous recreation of the hunt for the Zodiac killer. This is one of the most famous unsolved cases in American history. Late 1960s, early 70s in San Francisco. Someone is killing people and sending coded letters to newspapers. The film is obsessively accurate. At least 5 people lost their lives between December 1968 and October 1969, though the real number is probably higher. 2 survived and gave descriptions. The Zodiac sent letters with ciphers to newspapers, taunting the police. One cipher was cracked in 1969, but the others remain unsolved for decades. In 2020, amateur codebreakers finally solved the 340-character cipher, 51 years later. The killer was never caught. We still don't know who the Zodiac was. What makes this unsettling isn't graphic violence. Fincher actually restrains himself. It's the obsession, the paranoia, and the fact that this person just got away with it. The case is still open. Somewhere, the Zodiac either died quietly or is still out there, having never faced justice. The film follows Robert Graysmith, a cartoonist at the San Francisco Chronicle who became obsessed with solving the case. His obsession destroyed his marriage and consumed years of his life. He spent years researching, tracking down leads, building timelines. His book became the definitive account of the case. Detective Dave Toschi was the lead investigator. He's the guy Steve McQueen based his character on in Bullet. Toschi worked the case for years. The stress destroyed him. He was eventually taken off the case. Arthur Lee Allen was the prime suspect, a convicted child molester who lived in Vallejo. The circumstantial evidence was overwhelming, but they could never prove it. Allen died in 1992 before DNA testing could definitively link him. Some people think he was the Zodiac. Others aren't convinced. The film captures that frustration perfectly. You watch these investigators slowly losing their minds, trying to solve something that might be unsolvable. 127 hours. James Franco plays Aaron Ralston, a hiker who went into a Utah canyon in 2003 and got his arm trapped under a boulder. He was stuck there for 5 days, 127 hours, with no way to call for help, no way to move the rock. And then he made the decision to amputate his own arm with a dull multi-tool knife. Aaron Ralston is a real person. This really happened in April 2003, April 26th to be exact. He was 27 years old, descending into Blue John Canyon in southeastern Utah. Around 2:45 p.m., an 800-pound boulder shifted and pinned his right arm against the canyon wall. He was trapped 100 feet below the desert surface, 20 miles from the nearest paved road. He had a small amount of food and water. After he ran out, he drank his own urine to survive. He carved his name, date of birth, and presumed date of death into the canyon wall. He recorded goodbye messages to his family on his video camera. That footage exists. Ralston keeps it private, only showing it to his closest family and friends. Director Danny Boyle and James Franco were the only outsiders allowed to see it. After 5 days, dehydrated and delirious, he broke his arm bones using the boulder's weight, then had to cut through his arm with a cheap multi-tool. Not a Leatherman. He said it was like what you'd get free with a $15 flashlight. He wrote a book about it. The amputation scene in the movie is horrific. It's hard to watch. Danny Boyle doesn't shy away from showing the reality of what Ralston had to do to survive. James Franco said he actually has a problem with seeing blood on his arms, so his reaction during filming was genuinely visceral. After freeing himself, Ralston had to rappel down a 65-foot wall with one arm, then hike about 6 miles. He encountered a Dutch family on vacation, Eric, Monique, and their son Andy, who gave him food and water and called for help. A rescue helicopter found him 4 hours after the amputation. He'd lost 40 pounds, including 25% of his blood volume. Ralston lived. He's still alive today, still hiking, still climbing. He became the first person to solo climb all of Colorado's 14ers, peaks over 14,000 feet, in winter. He got married, had kids. His prosthetic arm is custom made with an ice pick attachment so he can keep climbing. The impossible. Naomi Watts and Ewan McGregor play a family caught in the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami in Thailand. The film focuses on one Spanish family's survival story, and they all made it. But the context of this film is that over 230,000 people lost their lives in that tsunami across 14 countries. It's one of the worst natural disasters in recorded history. December 26, 2004. A 9.1 magnitude earthquake off the coast of Sumatra triggered waves up to 100 feet high. The waves traveled at speeds of up to 500 miles per hour in the open ocean. 14 countries were hit: Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, India, the Maldives, and more. The family the film follows is the Bellons, Maria, Enrique, and their 3 sons. They were at a resort in Khao Lak, Thailand, when the first wave hit. The film recreates the wave hitting with terrifying accuracy. The water isn't just water, it's filled with debris, cars, parts of buildings. You watch this family get torn apart by the water, not knowing if they'll find each other. Maria Bellon suffered massive internal injuries. She spent months in hospitals recovering. The fact that she survived at all is remarkable. Kids are in danger, there's graphic injuries, and every time you see someone else in the background struggling, you know statistically most of them didn't make it. The family at the center survived, but you're watching a tragedy that killed 250,000 people. Level 3. Goodfellas. Martin Scorsese's masterpiece about the mob. Henry Hill was a real person in the Lucchese crime family from the 1950s through 1980. The Lufthansa heist that the film depicts, that really happened. December 1978, JFK Airport, $5.8 million stolen. It was the largest cash robbery on American soil at the time. And the murders in this film? Real people. Jimmy Burke, Tommy DeSimone, these were actual mobsters who killed actual people. Multiple people lost their lives because of the actions depicted in this movie. Tommy DeSimone, played as Tommy DeVito in the film, was a genuine psychopath. The funny how scene? Based on a real incident. DeSimone really did kill William Billy Bats Bendvena in 1970, just like in the movie. He also killed Ronald Foxy Giroth. DeSimone himself was murdered in 1979, probably in retaliation for killing a made man without permission. Jimmy Burke, Jimmy Conway in the film, orchestrated the Lufthansa heist. He then systematically murdered most of the people involved to eliminate witnesses. At least 10 people lost their lives in the aftermath of that heist. Burke died in prison in 1966 while serving time for murder. The film initially glamorizes the lifestyle, the money, the respect, the excitement, and then slowly deconstructs it. By the end, you realize these guys destroyed lives, including their own. Henry Hill entered witness protection in 1980 and spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. He died in 2012, having lived under multiple identities. The violence is stylized, but it's based on testimony from actual crimes. These murders happened. Monster. Monster from 2003. Charlize Theron won an Oscar for playing Aileen Wuornos, who's often called America's first female serial killer. Between 1989 and 1990, Wuornos killed 7 men while working along Florida highways. Richard Mallory, David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Peter Seams, Troy Burress, Charles Humphreys, Walter Antonio. 7 men, all shot with a .22 caliber pistol, all found along Florida highways. She claimed they all assaulted or attempted to assault her, that she was acting in self-defense. The truth is probably more complicated. Wuornos had an incredibly traumatic childhood, abandoned by her mother, raised by abusive grandparents, Pregnant at 14, living in the woods. Her life was a series of traumas that probably damaged her beyond repair. But regardless of motive, 7 people lost their lives at her hands. Wuornos was executed in October 2002, just a year before the film came out. Her final words were, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6, like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back." She'd completely lost touch with reality by the end. The trial transcripts are extensive. There's documentary footage of her. Charlize Theron completely transformed herself for the role, gained 30 pounds, wore prosthetic teeth, made herself almost unrecognizable. The film tries to show Wuornos as a human being, not just a monster. It's a serial killer story, but it's also trying to be sympathetic to someone who committed horrifying acts. You find yourself understanding her a little bit, and that feels wrong. United 93. This one is tough. United 93 from 2006 is a real-time depiction of the hijacked flights on September 11th, 2001. Everyone watching this movie knows how it ends. All 44 people aboard lost their lives when the plane crashed in Pennsylvania. September 11th, 2001. United Airlines Flight 93 departed Newark at 8:42 a.m. bound for San Francisco. 37 passengers, 7 crew members, 4 hijackers. The flight was delayed by 41 minutes due to heavy traffic, which ended up being crucial. Because of that delay, by the time the hijackers took control around 9:28 a.m., the other 3 planes had already hit their targets. Passengers on Flight 93 were making phone calls, learning about the World Trade Center and Pentagon attacks in real time. They knew this wasn't a normal hijacking. They knew they were going to die unless they fought back. The hijackers were Ziad Jarrah, Ahmed al-Nami, Ahmed al-Haznawi, and Saeed al-Ghamdi. Jarrah was the pilot. Their intended target was likely the US Capitol or the White House. At 9:57 a.m., the passengers voted. They decided to fight back. Tom Burnett, Todd Beamer, Mark Bingham, Jeremy Glick. These names are now memorialized. Todd Beamer's final words on the cockpit voice recorder. "Are you ready? Okay, let's roll." They stormed the cockpit. The hijackers, realizing they'd lost control, decided to crash the plane rather than surrender. At 10:03 a.m., United 93 slammed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania at 563 miles per hour. The plane hit the ground at a 40-degree angle, almost inverted. The impact created a crater 30 feet deep. 7,000 gallons of jet fuel ignited. Hundreds of acres of forest caught fire. The film depicts this in real time. You watch people making phone calls to their families, saying goodbye. You hear actual cockpit recordings. The movie uses as much real audio as possible. What saved countless lives in Washington that day was the 41-minute delay and the passengers' knowledge of what had happened to the other planes. If Flight 93 had departed on time, the passengers wouldn't have known. The plane would have reached its target. The youngest passenger was 20-year-old Deora Bodley. The oldest was 79-year-old Hilda Marson. Flight attendant C.C. Lyles called her husband and said, "I hope to see your face again, baby. I love you. Goodbye." Captain Jason Dahl and First Officer Leroy Homer were both killed by the hijackers within minutes of the takeover. The Flight 93 National Memorial now stands at the crash site. There is a wall of names with all 40 passengers and crew members, a tower of voices with 40 wind chimes. Level 4. Wolf Creek. This Australian horror film from 2005 is based on the backpacker murders that happened in the Australian outback in the 1990s. The film draws from 2 real cases. First, the backpacker murders between 1898 and 1993, where Ivan Milat killed at least 7 young people hitchhiking through New South Wales. The second is the case of Bradley John Murdoch, who was convicted of murdering British tourist Peter Falconio in 2001 on a remote highway in the Northern Territory. Ivan Milat targeted backpackers travelling between Sydney and Melbourne. The victims were shot, stabbed, and their bodies were found in Belanglo State Forest. All were young adults from different countries: Australia, Germany, and the UK. The cases went unsolved for years until police finally connected them in 1993. Milat was arrested in 1994 after a massive investigation. He was convicted of 7 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment. He died in prison in 2019 at age 74. Bradley Murdoch's case was different but equally disturbing. He stopped Peter Falconio and his girlfriend Joanne Leese on a remote highway, claiming there was something wrong with their vehicle's exhaust. When Falconio got out to check, Murdoch shot him. Leese managed to escape and hide for 5 hours before flagging down a road train. Falconio's body was never found. Murdoch was convicted in 2005 based on DNA evidence and is serving life imprisonment. Snowtown. Snowtown from 2011 is an Australian film about the Snowtown murders, a series of killings in South Australia between 1992 and 1999. John Bunting and Robert Wagner killed at least 11 people, possibly more. The victims included Bunting's girlfriend's son, homeless people, and anyone Bunting decided was a pedophile or otherwise undesirable. The torture was methodical. I won't describe the methods, but Bunting recorded some of it on tape. The bodies were found in barrels of acid in an abandoned bank vault in Snowtown in May 1999. 8 bodies in 6 barrels. The smell when the police opened that vault was described as indescribable. Some victims had been missing for years. Families had reported them missing, but nobody connected the dots. Bunting justified everything as vigilante justice. He claimed he was protecting children by killing pedophiles. Some of his victims probably were abusers, others absolutely weren't. They were just vulnerable people Bunting didn't like. He'd decide someone was a threat, and that was it. Death sentence. The torture happened in Bunting's house. Neighbors heard screams but didn't report it. The Australian legal system failed to protect these victims until it was way too late. Bunting showed no remorse at trial. He believed he was cleansing society. He's currently serving life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Wagner is also serving life. Grizzly Man. Grizzly Man from 2005. Werner Herzog's documentary about Timothy Treadwell, who spent 13 summers living among grizzly bears in Alaska. In October 2003, a bear killed and ate both Treadwell and his girlfriend, Amy Huguenot. Treadwell filmed himself constantly. Hours and hours of footage of him talking to bears, living in their territory, convinced he had a special connection with them. The footage is beautiful and deeply unsettling because you know how it ends. The audio of their deaths exist. The camera was on, lens cap on when the attack happened. 6 minutes of screaming. Herzog listened to it while filming the documentary. He told Treadwell's ex-girlfriend, who had the tape, to destroy it. He never released it. You don't hear it in the film, but you watch Herzog listening to it through headphones. You see his face. That's almost worse than hearing it. The bears that killed them were found and shot. Treadwell's remains were found inside one of them. Amy's watch was still ticking. Level 5. The Killing of America. The Killing of America from 1981 is a documentary that was banned in the United States for years. It's a compilation of real footage showing violence in America. Assassinations, murders, mass shootings, executions. You see actual deaths on camera. The film includes footage of the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan, the Jonestown Massacre aftermath, interviews with serial killers. The film argues that America has a uniquely violent culture. Whether you agree with this thesis or not, the footage is real. The documentary was released in Japan and parts of Europe, but not in the US. It's since become available, but remains one of the most controversial documentaries ever made because of its graphic content. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer from 1986 is based on confessions from Henry Lee Lucas, who claimed to have killed hundreds of people. Lucas was a real serial killer, though the actual number of his victims is disputed. He confessed to over 600 murders, but later recanted most of them. Police think he made up confessions to get better treatment in prison and to mess with the investigators. He was definitely responsible for several deaths, including his mother in 1960 and his wife Becky Powell in 1982. Lucas had one of the most horrific childhoods imaginable. His mother was a sex worker who forced him to watch her with clients. She dressed him in girls' clothing. She beat him regularly. His father was an alcoholic who lost both legs in a train accident. Lucas lost an eye in a childhood injury and wore a glass eye for the rest of his life. The film follows Henry and his accomplice Otis as they randomly kill people. A television salesman, a family, random victims picked for no reason. Henry Lee Lucas died in prison in 2001 from heart failure. He was the only death row inmate George W. Bush ever commuted, not out of mercy, but because there was so much doubt about which murders he actually committed. The film is considered one of the most realistic depictions of serial killing ever made, which is exactly why it's so hard to watch. Threads. Threads from 1984 is a British TV film about nuclear war. It depicts Sheffield, England, before, during, and after a nuclear attack. This is based on extensive research into what would actually happen in a nuclear war. The film consulted scientists, military experts, medical professionals. What you see on screen is as realistic as possible. The UK government had secret civil defense plans that basically admitted most people would die. Threads shows what those plans couldn't prevent. The bomb drops about 45 minutes in. Sheffield gets hit with a 1 megaton warhead. The immediate blast kills thousands instantly. Then comes the firestorm. The electromagnetic pulse knocks out all electronics. Communications collapse. The film shows people trying to flee the city, getting caught in traffic jams, dying from radiation exposure on the roads. Then you watch society collapse. No food, no medicine, no government. Radiation sickness, starvation, people fighting over scraps. The National Health Service is gone. Hospitals are being overwhelmed and then abandoned. Martial law fails because military can't cope. The film follows characters for years after the attack, showing the generational trauma. Within weeks, people are dying of dysentery from drinking contaminated water. Crops fail from nuclear winter. The UV radiation from the destroyed ozone layer causes cancers and blindness. By the end, you're watching people who've regressed to a pre-industrial society. Children born after the attack can barely speak. Civilization has genuinely ended. Nobody dies in Threads directly. It was fiction, but it's based on real nuclear war scenarios. The UK government kept classified files on expected casualties. Millions would die immediately. Tens of millions more from starvation and disease in the months after. The film was so disturbing that the BBC aired it with warnings and follow-up discussions. Teachers showed it in schools to communicate the reality of nuclear war during the Cold War. Some kids had nightmares for weeks after watching it. It's considered one of the most terrifying depictions of nuclear war ever made, precisely because it doesn't flinch from showing what would really happen. Level 6. The Killing Fields. The Killing Fields from 1984 tells the story of Cambodian journalist Dith Pran and his experience under the Khmer Rouge regime in the 1970s. The Cambodian genocide happened between 1975 and 1979. The Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, killed approximately 1.7 to 2 million people, about 25% of Cambodia's population. They targeted intellectuals, city dwellers, ethnic minorities, anyone with glasses, which implied literacy. Wearing glasses could get you executed. Speaking a foreign language could get you executed. Being educated could get you executed. The Khmer Rouge evacuated Phnom Penh and other cities. Everyone had to work in agricultural labor camps. Year Zero, they called it, erasing all previous history. Money was abolished. Religion was banned. Families were separated. Children were indoctrinated to spy on their parents. Dith Pran was a real person who survived the genocide. His friend, American journalist Sidney Schanberg, escaped Cambodia, but Pran was trapped. Pran spent 4 years under Khmer Rouge control, witnessing mass executions, forced labor, and starvation. The killing fields were real, mass graves where thousands were executed and buried. Chong Ek, just outside Phnom Penh, is now a memorial. You can see the skulls and bones. Over 8,000 bodies were found there alone. Skulls are arranged by age and gender in a glass stupa. It's haunting. Pran survived by pretending to be an uneducated peasant. He hid his intelligence, his education, and his connections to Americans. Dith Pran later became a photographer for the New York Times and an advocate for genocide awareness. He dedicated his life to making sure people remembered what happened. He died in 2008 from pancreatic cancer. 10 Rillington Place. 10 Rillington Place from 1971 is about John Christie, a serial killer in 1940s to 50s London. Christie murdered at least 8 women, including his wife. He hid the bodies in his house at 10 Rillington Place in Notting Hill. But here's the twisted part. Christie testified against his upstairs neighbor, Timothy Evans, who was accused of murdering his wife and baby daughter. Evans was convicted largely on Christie's testimony and was hanged in 1950. Evans was illiterate and had learning difficulties. He was an easy target. Christie, who'd served as a special constable during the war, seemed like a respectable witness. The jury believed him. Evans maintained his innocence, but nobody listened. 3 years later, Christie was arrested. Bodies were found throughout his house, buried under the floorboards, in a hidden alcove behind wallpaper in the kitchen, in the garden. Christie confessed to killing Evans' wife, Beryl. He'd strangled her and hidden her body. Evans had been telling the truth all along, but nobody believed him. Evans had been innocent. Christie confessed in 1953 and was hanged. Evans was posthumously pardoned in 1966 after a lengthy inquiry, but that doesn't bring him back. An innocent man was executed because a serial killer lied in court. The house was demolished in 1970 because no one could stand to live there. The entire street was eventually torn down. Christie's case led to the abolition of capital punishment in the UK. The Evans case proved that innocent people could be executed based on false testimony. It became one of the strongest arguments against the death penalty. Memories of Murder. Memories of Murder from 2003, directed by Bong Joon-ho. This is about the Hwasong serial murders in South Korea between 1986 and 1991. 10 women were murdered. The police investigation was a disaster. Evidence was contaminated. Suspects were tortured into false confessions. The actual killer was never caught. The film depicts this incompetence and the victims suffering with brutal honesty. The women ranged from young adults to elderly. They were found in rural areas around Hwasong, south of Seoul. The killer used specific methods, binding victims with their own clothing, strangling them. The pattern was clear, but police couldn't catch him. In 2019, the killer was finally identified through DNA. His name is Lee Chun-jae, but the statute of limitations had expired. He can never be prosecuted for the Hwasong murders. He's in prison for other crimes. He was convicted of murdering his sister-in-law in 1994. But he'll never face justice for these 10 women. The film ends with a detective staring into the camera, as if looking at the killer, knowing he's out there somewhere. Watching it now, knowing the killer was identified but got away with it because of legal technicalities is infuriating and heartbreaking. Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father. Dear Zachary from 2008. This is a documentary made by Kurt Kuhn about his friend Andrew Bagby, who was murdered in 2001 by his ex-girlfriend Shirley Jane Turner. Andrew Bagby was 28 years old, a medical resident in Pennsylvania. In November 2001, Turner shot him 5 times and fled to Canada with their son Zachary. Andrew's parents, David and Kathleen Bagby, fought for custody from Newfoundland. The film starts as a project to tell Andrew's son Zachary about his father. Andrew's parents are trying to get custody of Zachary from Shirley, who fled to Canada. And then midway through the documentary, something happens that I'm not going to spoil. If you haven't seen this film and you think you can handle it, go watch it. All I'll say is that it involves the death of a child, and it's the most devastating moment in any documentary I've ever seen. The real events are documented in court records. On August 18th, 2003, Shirley Turner tragically took both their lives in the Atlantic Ocean. She'd been out on bail for Andrew's murder. The Canadian legal system had released her despite the murder charge. She'd been deemed not a flight risk. Shirley Jane Turner murdered both Andrew Bagby and their child. The Canadian legal system failed spectacularly. The film led to a law reform. Zachary's bill was passed in 2010, changing bail procedures in Canada for those accused of serious crimes with children in their care. But none of that brings anyone back. It's called the most emotionally devastating documentary ever made, and that's not an exaggeration. Level 7. Come and See. Come and See from 1985, a Soviet film about Nazi atrocities in Belarus during World War II. The film follows a young boy named Fleora, played by Alexei Kravchenko, who was 14 during filming, who joins the Soviet resistance and witnesses the complete destruction of his world. This is based on documented Nazi operations. The Katyn massacre on March 22, 1943. 149 people lost their lives. The village was completely destroyed. Over 2 million Belarusian civilians lost their lives during World War II. 628 villages were completely destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed. Completely wiped from existence. The film recreates the Katyn massacre. You watch a village get surrounded. Soldiers force everyone, men, women, children, elderly, into a barn. They lock the doors and set it on fire. The production was brutal. Real bullets were fired over the actors' heads to get genuine fear reactions. Kravchenko, the young actor, was hypnotized by the director to get through some scenes. By the end of filming, he looked genuinely traumatized. His hair turned grey during production. He was only 14. The film is considered one of the most realistic war films ever made. The final sequence, where Fliora watches archival footage of Hitler's rise, is genuinely terrifying. This isn't Hollywood war heroics. This is the horror of total war filmed with unflinching realism. The boy who plays Fliora genuinely looks traumatized by the end of filming. The production was brutal, and watching it, you feel that brutality. There's no relief, no triumph, just survival in a world that's been destroyed. The Act of Killing. The Act of Killing from 2012. In 1965 and 1966, the Indonesian government orchestrated mass killings, anti-communist purges. Between 500,000 and 2 million people lost their lives. Death squads went door to door. If you were accused of being a communist, you were dead. The perpetrators were never punished. They are still in power. They're national heroes. Director Joshua Oppenheimer found these death squad leaders and asked them to reenact the murders they committed in whatever film genre they wanted. And they did it. Gleefully. The main subject, Anwar Congo, demonstrates on camera how he would strangle people with wire. He killed hundreds with his own hands, maybe 1,000. He's not sure of the exact number. He smiles while demonstrating. He dresses up in costumes. He choreographs musical numbers about mass murders. This isn't actors playing killers. These are the actual killers, demonstrating on camera how they murdered over 1 million people. And they're proud of it. The Indonesian government still celebrates these killings. Pancasila Youth, the paramilitary organization involved, now has 3 million members. Politicians praise gangsters as free men who did what the government couldn't officially do. At one point, Anwar appears on a talk show. The host says cheerfully, Anwar Congo and his friends developed a more humane system. The studio audience applauds. Throughout the film, you watch Anwar slowly start to understand what he did. There's a scene where he's at the rooftop where he killed people, and he suddenly starts retching uncontrollably. He dry heaves for minutes. It's the closest thing to remorse you see, but he never says he was wrong. He never apologizes. But it doesn't matter. He's still free. He has grandchildren. The victims' families still live in fear. Filmmaker Joshua Oppenheimer started by filming survivors, but the military threatened them. The survivors told him, film the perpetrators. Show the world what they did. The film sparked conversations that had been suppressed for decades. Some younger Indonesians had no idea about the 1965 events, but the power structure hasn't changed. Anwar Congo died in 2019 at age 82. He was never prosecuted. These aren't monsters. They're ordinary people who committed genocide and got away with it. They're grandfathers now, and they sleep fine at night. So that's the bottom of the iceberg. If you made it this far, hit that like and subscribe button. And let me know in the comments which level was the worst. See you in the next one.